The restaurant was all sharp angles and glass, the kind of place my son Leo, in all his architectural brilliance, would design. We were there to celebrate his latest award, but I couldn't focus on the sleek furniture or the glittering Scottsdale skyline. My attention was fixed on the single glass of water my daughter-in-law, Amber, was sliding across the polished table toward me. A single sprig of mint floated inside. "Here, Helen," she said, her voice smooth and syrupy, loud enough for my son to hear. "I had them bring you a special alkaline water. It will be better for your nerves than the wine." My nerves? I taught advanced trigonometry to 17-year-olds for 40 years. My nerves are made of forged steel. I'm a woman who prides herself on logic, on seeing the world in clear, provable equations. And here I was, being treated like a fragile child who couldn't handle a celebratory glass of Chardonnay. I looked at Leo, hoping to see a flicker of defense in his eyes. Instead, he just stared intently at his menu, as if it held the secrets to the universe. His silence was a quiet, crushing betrayal. Amber smiled, a perfect, polished influencer's smile. "Just drink it, dear," she cooed. "We want you feeling your best." Ugh. That single glass of water felt like the last stone in a wall she'd been methodically building between my son and me for months. And as I stared at the mint leaf suspended in the crystal-clear liquid, I realized the poison wasn't just in the glass, it had been seeping into our family all along. To understand how a simple glass of water could feel like a loaded gun, we have to go back 3 months, to the day she first brought her special gifts into my home. Those gifts arrived on a Tuesday, one of those Arizona mornings so bright and clear it feels like the world has been polished. I was at my small oak desk in the sunroom, performing my weekly ritual, balancing my checkbook. For some people, it's a chore. For me, it's a comfort. My ledger, with its neat columns and precise entries, is a testament to an orderly life. Every penny accounted for, every decision documented. It's the story of my independence, written in black ink. I had just finished reconciling my account down to the last cent when the doorbell chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound in my quiet home. It was Amber. She swept into my foyer like a desert dust devil, all Lululemon and the faint, expensive scent of sandalwood. She was holding a large, crisp paper bag from some organic market where a head of lettuce probably cost $12. "Helen, you're looking so vibrant today," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Her energy was always overwhelming, a stark contrast to the calm, measured pace of my life. I offered her iced tea, but she just waved a perfectly manicured hand and said, "Oh, no thank you. I'm on a chlorophyll fast this morning. It's all about purifying the system." I nodded, not bothering to ask what a chlorophyll fast was. With Amber, it was easier to just let the jargon wash over you. My late husband, a brilliant engineer, would have had a field day with her. He dealt in blueprints and stress tolerances. Amber dealt in vibes and auras. She placed the bag on my granite countertop with a soft thud. "I brought you something. Leo and I have been doing so much research, and we are just so excited." She pulled out 3 bottles. They were beautiful, I'll give her that, made of a dark violet-colored glass with minimalist labels printed on thick, textured paper. The names were written in a flowing, elegant script. Rooted Vitality, Celestial Calm, Solar Harmony. It looked like she was selling poetry, not pills. I picked one up, Celestial Calm. The glass was cool and heavy in my hand. "What exactly is this?" I asked, my old teacher habits kicking in. I was already reaching for my reading glasses. "It's a custom blend I designed just for you," she said, beaming. "It's a synergistic fusion of adaptogenic herbs and ancient botanicals to help your body find its natural equilibrium. It will support your cardiovascular system and promote a serene state of mind." I turned the bottle over, looking for an ingredients list, a nutrition panel, something concrete. The back was just more beautiful words. Wild harvested ashwagandha, passion flower essence, and holy basil. "And the active ingredients?" I asked. "What are the dosages in milligrams?" Amber laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Helen, you're thinking in such an old-school clinical way. This isn't about milligrams, it's about the holistic energy of the plants. It's intuitive. You just take one of each with your breakfast. Your body will know what to do." My body knows what to do with Lipitor, because my doctor, a man with a medical degree from Johns Hopkins, prescribed it at a specific, tested dosage. My mind, which knows that synergistic fusion is a meaningless phrase, was screaming to put the bottles back in the bag and show Amber the door. But I didn't. I didn't because I saw the next move in her playbook before she even made it. "Leo is just so worried about you," she said, her voice softening, oozing with counterfeit concern. "He feels so guilty that his work keeps him too busy. He just wants to know you're being taken care of, that you have every possible tool for a long, healthy life. We spent weeks putting this plan together for you. It's his way of showing how much he loves you." And there it was, the emotional checkmate. If I refused her snake oil, I wasn't just refusing a gift. I was rejecting my son's love. I was being difficult, ungrateful. I was making him worry. It was a perfectly constructed little trap, and my only way out was to create a family crisis. I looked from her earnest, smiling face to the bottles lined up on my counter. They looked alien in my kitchen, a space of precise measurements for baking and time-tested recipes. I thought of my ledger on the desk, the symbol of my self-sufficiency. I'd managed my own finances, my own home, and my own health for 70 years. I still walked 2 miles every morning, and my blood pressure was the envy of my bridge club. I didn't need a 20-something with a weekend certification in life coaching to manage my equilibrium. But I also didn't want the phone call from Leo later that night, the one where he'd sound tired and stressed, and I'd hear Amber whispering in the background, telling him how I'd refused his help. I put the bottle down on the counter. The small definitive click was the only protest I allowed myself. I closed my ledger at the desk, the soft thud of the cover feeling like a concession. "All right, Amber," I said, my voice even. "Thank you. It's very thoughtful. I'll try them." Her smile widened, victorious. "Wonderful. I'll bring you a new supply next month. We'll have you feeling better than ever." Better than ever? I felt perfectly fine. After she left, a trail of sandalwood lingering in the air, I stood in my silent kitchen and just looked at the 3 bottles. Rooted vitality, celestial calm, solar harmony. They were a foreign language I couldn't translate, an unsolvable equation. I picked one up again and shook it. It made a soft, rattling sound, like a tiny rattlesnake. I looked out the window at the giant saguaro cactus in my yard. It had stood there for 100 years, following the simple, logical rules of the desert: sun, water, time. It didn't need any help finding its equilibrium. For the first time in a long time, standing in my own home, I felt like a variable had been introduced into my life that I couldn't control. And I was right. That feeling of an unsolvable problem, of a variable introduced into my life that I couldn't control, it was so alien. My mind is built on the principle that every problem has a logical solution, a proof that can be methodically uncovered. It reminded me of the nights I spent helping Leo find solutions of his own, back when the variables were just X and Y on a page, and the world was as simple as a geometric theorem. It's funny how a single, useless supplement bottle could transport me back 25 years to a cluttered desk under the yellow glow of a reading lamp. Leo was 16 then, all gangly limbs and a perpetual frown of concentration. He had my late husband's dark, thoughtful eyes and, at that moment, all of his stubborn frustration. He was drowning in his 10th grade geometry homework, a sea of triangles and bisecting lines that stood between him and his dream of becoming an architect. I remember the smell of the room stale coffee I'd brewed to get through grading papers, pencil shavings, and the faint, sweet scent of the eraser dust he'd been angrily scrubbing into the page. I'd finished my own work for the night and found him slumped over his textbook, his head in his hands. A protractor lay abandoned next to a half-empty can of Coke. "I'm done," he mumbled into his palms. "This is impossible. I'm just not smart enough for this." I pulled up a chair, the familiar scrape of its wooden legs on the floor the only sound for a moment. I looked at the page. It was a complex proof, requiring him to demonstrate why 2 seemingly unrelated triangles within a larger shape were congruent. It was a puzzle box of logic, and he was trying to smash it open with brute force instead of finding the key. "Let me see," I said softly, picking up the textbook. The pages were worn, the corners softened from use, the margins filled with his elaborate doodles of futuristic buildings. Even in his frustration, his passion was right there on the page. I wasn't just looking at a math problem, I was looking at the blueprint of his future. "It's pointless, Mom," he said, not lifting his head. "Mr. Davison said this would be on the final and I just don't get it. Maybe I should just stick to art class." I ignored his defeatism. I knew my son. He didn't lack intelligence, he lacked patience. He saw the beautiful finished building in his mind, but hated the tedious work of laying the foundation, of making sure every angle was true and every line was straight. I took a fresh sheet of paper and his pencil, a perfectly sharpened Ticonderoga number 2. "Okay," I said, my voice shifting into the calm, steady tone I used in my classroom. "Let's not look at the whole thing. It's overwhelming. Let's just look at one small piece. What do we know for sure?" He grumbled, but eventually sat up, peering at the paper. "We know that line AB is parallel to line DE," he said, pointing. "Good. That's a given. And if those lines are parallel, what does that tell us about this angle here?" I drew a connecting line, an alternate interior angle. He hesitated, then his eyes lit up with a flicker of recognition. It means it's equal to that other angle, because the transversal cuts across parallel lines. Exactly, I said, tapping the paper with the pencil. One piece of the puzzle. Now, what else do we know for sure? For the next hour, we sat there under the lamp, not as mother and son, but as collaborators. We worked through it step by step, identifying the given truths, applying the theorems, and building a logical chain of evidence. I never gave him an answer. I just asked the right questions, nudging him toward the conclusions he already had the tools to find. He got stuck again, trying to prove a side was equal, letting out a heavy sigh of frustration. He leaned back, defeated again. "It's not enough. I still can't prove it." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Every problem has a logical solution, Leo," I told him, the words a mantra I had lived by my entire life. "You're looking at it head on. Sometimes you just have to find the right angle." I turned the paper 45 degrees. Suddenly, the two triangles were no longer nested in a confusing jumble, but were sitting side by side in a clear, obvious relationship. His eyes went wide. The shared side, the reflexive property, it was all suddenly, glaringly simple. "Oh," he whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Oh, wow." He grabbed the pencil from my hand, and for the next 5 minutes, the only sound was the confident scratch of lead on paper as he wrote out the final steps of the proof. He finished with a flourish, drawing the little square at the end of the last line. QED quod erat demonstrandum, that which was to be demonstrated. He had done it. The look on his face in that moment, it wasn't just relief, it was triumph. It was the pure, unadulterated joy of wrestling with a complex problem and winning. He hadn't just solved for X, he had affirmed his own capability. That look was worth more to me than 1,000 Mother's Day cards. That was my reward, seeing the foundation I helped him build become strong enough for him to build his own dreams upon. Standing there in my kitchen, a quarter-century later, I held that memory in my mind like a precious, fragile thing. I remembered the sharp, intelligent boy who understood that truth was something you proved with evidence, the boy I taught to trust logic above all else. And I tried to reconcile him with the man who now let his wife feed me platitudes about holistic energy and intuitive wellness. The man who didn't question, who didn't ask for proof, who didn't even seem to notice that his own mother, the woman who taught him to think, was being treated like she'd lost the ability to do so. I put the bottle of Celestial Calm down, its violet glass looking dark and ominous in the bright Arizona Sunday. The memory of Leo's triumph felt like a faded photograph. That night, I had helped him find the right angle to solve a problem. Now, a new, far more dangerous problem had been placed in my home, and I felt a cold certainty that this time, I would have to find the solution all on my own. Finding a solution on my own started with a simple, logical step: observation. If I was going to introduce a new, unproven variable into the stable equation of my life, then I, Helen Vance, retired teacher of mathematics, was going to document its effects. I wasn't going to trust Amber's vague promises of vibrancy and equilibrium. I was going to collect my own data. The next day, after my morning walk, I opened the crisp new accounting ledger I'd bought from Office Max. It wasn't a diary for my feelings. It was a lab notebook. With my favorite ruler and a fine-tipped pen, I drew 4 columns: date, time, dosage, and anomalies. Under dosage I wrote 1x rooted vitality, 1x celestial calm, 1x solar harmony. Then, with a deep breath, I swallowed the first set of pills with my orange juice. They had a faint, bitter, earthy taste that lingered at the back of my throat. For the first week, The anomalies column remained blank. I started to think that maybe the pills were just what Amber claimed they were. Overpriced, useless capsules of powdered weeds. Maybe the only side effect was a lighter wallet. The first anomaly occurred on a Thursday afternoon, 9 days in. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, working on the New York Times crossword puzzle, my daily mental exercise. I was stuck on 17 down. A state of confusion. 7 letters. My mind was cycling through options when I felt it, a strange tingling sensation in the tips of my left fingers. It felt exactly like when your foot falls asleep, that pins and needles feeling, but in my hand. I put my pen down and flexed my fingers. It wasn't painful, just odd. Foreign. I looked at the clock. It was 10:15 a.m. I had taken the pills at 9 a.m. I walked over to my desk, opened the ledger, and made my first entry in the final column. October 3rd. 10:15 a.m. Tingling divided by numbness in fingertips, left hand. Lasted approx. 5 minutes. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, I was outside tending to my rose bushes, my pride and joy. The Arizona sun was warm on my back, and the air smelled of dry earth and blossoms. I was reaching down to snip a dead head when a wave of dizziness washed over me so suddenly it felt like the whole world had tilted on its axis. I gripped the trellis to steady myself, my heart hammering against my ribs. The flagstones of my patio seemed to rush up to meet me, then recede. I closed my eyes, taking deep, steadying breaths until the vertigo subsided. My heart was doing a strange flutter, a little stutter step that was definitely not normal. When I opened my eyes, the world was back in focus, but I felt shaken. I went inside, drank a glass of water, and made another entry in the ledger. October 5th, 1:30 p.m. Severe dizziness while gardening. Heart palpitations. Lasted approx. 30 seconds. The entries began to accumulate. A metallic taste in my mouth after lunch. A moment of disorientation where I walked into the pantry instead of the laundry room. A dull headache that settled behind my eyes every afternoon. Each time I noted the date, the time, and the specific sensation. And a pattern began to emerge, as clear and undeniable as a geometric proof. The anomalies, without fail, began to manifest 60 to 90 minutes after I took the pills. After 2 weeks of meticulous data collection, I knew I had to talk to Leo. I wasn't going to be dramatic. I wasn't going to accuse anyone of anything. I was simply going to present my findings, as I would to any reasonable student. I called him that evening. He was on his way home from the office, and I could hear the sound of traffic and his car's blinker over the line. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice tired. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine, dear," I said. "I just wanted to ask you about those supplements Amber brought over. I've been taking them like she said, but I've noticed a few side effects, and I thought you should know." "Side effects?" There was a new edge to his voice. Not concern, but weariness. "Yes, I've been keeping a log," I said, looking down at my ledger. "I've been experiencing some dizziness and a recurring tingling sensation in my hands. It seems to happen about an hour after I take them each morning." I waited. I expected him to ask questions, to say, "Maybe you should stop taking them," or "Let me talk to Amber." Instead, there was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Mom," he said, and the exhaustion in his voice was thick. "Amber said you might feel some of that. It's the supplements working. She said it's your body detoxing all the environmental pollutants. The tingling means your circulation is improving. It's a good thing. It means the herbs are doing their job." "Oh." I held the phone to my ear, speechless. Detoxing. The word was so meaningless, so unscientific, it felt like an insult. He was reciting a script. Amber's script. "Leo," I started, trying to keep my voice calm and logical. "I'm a 70-year-old woman. I know what my body feels like. This doesn't feel like good circulation. It feels wrong." "Well, Amber has studied this stuff extensively," he said, a little too quickly. "She works with clients on this all the time. I think we should trust her expertise. Just give it another few weeks. She says it takes time for the body to adjust." My expertise, 40 years of teaching logic and reason, meant nothing. His wife's expertise, gleaned from some online course, was gospel. The son I had taught to solve for X was now accepting a conclusion without any proof whatsoever. "All right, Leo," I said, my voice flat. The conversation was over. We said our goodbyes and I hung up. I sat there in the quiet of my sunroom, the phone still in my hand. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. For the first time, a genuine fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my analytical calm. This wasn't just about my health anymore. It was about my credibility. I was being told that my own, carefully observed reality was wrong. I opened my ledger one more time that night. I wrote down the date and time of my phone call with Leo. And then, in the anomalies column, I wrote a new entry. It wasn't a physical symptom. It was a conclusion, drawn from the evidence presented. Spoke to Leo. He is not a reliable source of data. Crossing my own son off the list of reliable sources was a chilling act, like drawing a line through a name in my own address book. I put the ledger away, the solid little book feeling heavier than it should. I could almost picture the scene on his end, him walking into that starkly modern house he and Amber had built, the one that always felt more like an art gallery than a home. I could see him dropping his briefcase, the weight of his long day at the firm pressing down on his shoulders, and Amber being right there to meet him, ready to spin my concerns into a narrative that suited her. I knew my son. He'd be dead on his feet, his mind still cluttered with blueprints and zoning regulations for the new museum project that was consuming his life. He wouldn't want another problem to solve. He'd want peace. And Amber, she was an expert at selling a very convincing, very expensive brand of peace. In my mind's eye, I see her leading him to their white leather sofa, handing him a tall glass of something green and sludgy she'd call a restorative elixir. She wouldn't start by attacking me. She was too smart for that. She would start with concern for him. "You sound exhausted, honey," she'd say, her voice a soft, soothing hum. She'd touch his arm. "I spoke with your mother. I'm so glad you called me first. I think I know what's going on." And then she would produce her weapon of choice. Not a pill or a poison, but something far more insidious, her tablet. Its cool blue light would illuminate her face, making her look like a prophet of the digital age. She would have the articles already bookmarked, a curated collection of half-truths and fear-mongering headlines from wellness blogs and pop psychology websites. "I've been doing some reading," she'd say, her brow furrowed in a performance of deep thought. "Because what your mom is describing, the tingling, the dizziness, it isn't a side effect, it's a symptom." She would show him the screen. I can picture the headlines now, designed to prey on the deepest fears of a child watching their parent age. The silent epidemic, how unmanaged stress accelerates cognitive decline in seniors. And another, anxiety versus early dementia, recognizing the frightening overlap. Leo would read them, his architect's eye, trained to see clear lines and solid structures, now being fed a diet of shifting shadows and suggestive nonsense. "See?" Amber would say, tracing a line on the screen with her finger. "The articles talk about a fixation on minor bodily sensations, a tendency to log and document everything as a way of controlling anxiety. It says here that this kind of obsessive tracking, it's a classic sign of age-related cognitive stress. She's not just having physical symptoms, Leo, she's becoming paranoid." The evil of it was its brilliance. She was taking my greatest strength, my logical, methodical mind, and reframing it as a symptom of my decline. My ledger, my carefully collected data, was no longer proof of a problem with her supplements. In her narrative, it was proof of a problem with me. My one tool of self-defense had been turned into the chief weapon against me. Then would come the final, masterful stroke, making it all about him. She would put the tablet down, her face a mask of empathy. "Honey, I know how much you carry. You're trying to build this incredible career-defining museum, and on top of all that, you're worried sick about her. It's too much for one person. Please let me carry this for you. I have the time, I've done the research. Let me be the one to manage her care, to make sure she has everything she needs, so you can focus, so you can have some peace of mind." It was the perfect pitch. She wasn't just offering to help his mother, she was offering to absolve his guilt. The guilt of the successful American child, the one who works 60-hour weeks and calls on Sundays, who sends expensive flowers on birthdays but is never quite there enough. She was offering to take that heavy, amorphous burden of familial duty off his shoulders. All he had to do was trust her. All he had to do was stop listening to me. And in my imagined scene, my brilliant, logical son, the boy I taught to always check the proof, would finally just give in. He'd run his hands through his hair, look at the glowing screen of the tablet, and nod. The relief on his face would be palpable. He had found a solution. He had outsourced the problem. I opened my eyes. The real sun. In my real sunroom, suddenly feeling cold. The image in my head was so clear, so plausible, I knew it was the truth. My son wasn't my adversary. He was a victim too, manipulated by a far more skilled operator. But that didn't change my situation. I was an island now. The bridges had been burned, not with anger but with concern. To save myself, I couldn't just fight a poison. I had to fight my own son's love and his desperate, misguided attempt to save me. And I had no idea how to even begin. And so, I began by doing the one thing I could still do. I played my part. When the invitation for the award dinner arrived, a sleek, minimalist card celebrating the very museum project that was consuming my son's life, I said yes without hesitation. To refuse would have been to hand Amber a victory. It would have been proof of her carefully constructed narrative that I was anxious, antisocial, and unwell. If I was going to fight, I had to do it from within the enemy's camp, and that camp for this one night was a restaurant called Aperture. The name was fitting. It was a place of clean lines and vast panes of glass, a temple of modern architecture that felt like one of Leo's own designs. It was beautiful, I suppose, but it was a cold beauty. There was nothing soft to land on, no warmth in the polished concrete floors or the stark, angular furniture. I felt like a spare part from a different machine, an antique in a showroom. I had chosen my outfit with care, a classic silk dress in a deep sapphire blue, elegant and timeless. But next to Amber, who wore a stark white pantsuit that made her look like a piece of modern sculpture, I felt like a faded photograph. Leo was immediately swallowed up by a crowd of his colleagues, all sharp suits and sharper smiles. They slapped him on the back, shook his hand, and spoke a language of load-bearing walls and cantilevered balconies that I didn't understand. I watched him from a slight distance, my heart a confusing mix of emotions. A fierce, burning pride swelled in my chest. This was my son, the boy I'd coached through geometry proofs, now a man shaping the skyline of a city. He was brilliant, he was successful, and he was a stranger. "Let me get you a drink, Helen," Amber said, her hand a light, proprietary weight on my arm. Before I could ask for a simple glass of wine, she was already signaling a waiter. "She'll have a sparkling water with a twist of lemon. We're watching her sodium." I didn't protest. I just smiled, a placid, neutral expression I was perfecting. Every interaction was a test, and I was determined not to fail. We were seated at the best table in the house, a round island in a sea of admiring faces. Leo's boss, a man with a booming voice and a politician's handshake, stood to give a toast. He spoke of Leo's vision, his dedication, his once-in-a-generation talent. As Leo stood to accept the praise, his face flushed with a mixture of pride and humility. I felt a lump form in my throat. I saw, for just a second, the 16-year-old boy at his desk, the triumph in his eyes when he finally solved the proof. I had helped lay this foundation. And now, I was just a guest in the building he had built. The conversation around the table was a blur of industry gossip and talk of market trends. I was a ghost at the feast, smiling and nodding, while my mind was a whirlwind of calculations. I was making mental notes, as if for my ledger. Observation: Amber answers questions directed at Leo. Note: when his boss mentioned the stress of the project's deadline, Amber immediately looked at me. She was waiting for her opening, and the topic of stress gave it to her. "It's been incredibly intense," Amber said to the table, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "We've all been feeling the pressure. I've been making sure Leo gets his adaptogenic smoothies, of course, but it's been hardest on Helen. The worry has really been taking a toll on her." Every head at the table turned to me. I felt the heat of their gazes, a mixture of pity and curiosity. I was no longer Helen Vance, retired teacher and proud mother. I was a project, a concern, a problem to be managed. Leo looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Mom's tough," he mumbled, but it was a weak defense. "Of course she is," Amber said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her touch was as light as a spider's web and felt just as trapping. But stress at her age can manifest in very physical ways. It can affect the heart, blood pressure, everything. We have to be so careful. And then came the move I had been dreading, the moment I had seen coming since we sat down. She signaled the waiter with the effortless grace of a conductor. He appeared at her elbow instantly. "My mother-in-law won't be having any wine tonight," she announced to him, though her words were meant for the entire table. "Could you please bring her a glass of your best alkaline water?" with a sprig of mint. We're trying to keep her system calm. Ugh. And that's when she slid the glass across the table toward me, a clear, cold offering. "Here, Helen," she said, her voice a perfect blend of sweetness and steel. "It will be better for your nerves than the wine." The world narrowed to that single glass. The low hum of the restaurant faded. The faces of Leo's colleagues blurred into the background. It was just me, Amber, and her poison, disguised as a kindness. In that moment, I understood the full, terrifying genius of her plan. She had created a public narrative where my only two choices were to be a compliant patient or a difficult old woman. If I drank the water, I was submitting to her control, ingesting a substance I knew was harming me. If I refused, if I made a scene, I would be proving her point for her. Look at Helen, so anxious and paranoid, so confused. The glass sat before me on the white linen tablecloth, a silent, glittering threat. It was a checkmate. And as I looked at my son, who was now studiously avoiding my gaze, I knew I had to find a third move, an escape from a perfectly designed trap. But I had no idea what it could be. The seconds stretched out, each one a silent tick of a clock counting down to a decision I couldn't make. My mind, usually my greatest ally, was a blank slate of panic. I stared at the condensation forming on the glass, a tiny cold tear running down its side. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. Amber's smile was fixed, waiting. I was trapped. And then, a small, quiet presence appeared at the edge of my vision, a man in a crisp black suit. "For the table," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. He was holding a bottle of red wine, its label facing Leo. An excellent choice, the 2019 Cabernet from Napa Valley. A very good year. He was the sommelier. I learned later that his name was Rick, and he wasn't just a sommelier. He'd spent 10 years as a paramedic on the night shift in downtown Phoenix, a job that trains you to see things other people miss. It trains you to walk into a scene of chaos and instantly assess every detail, to find the one critical piece of information in a mountain of noise. While we saw a dinner party, he saw a diagnosis. As he told me afterward, his attention had been drawn to me even before he approached our table, not because I was making a scene, but because I was doing the opposite. He noticed my stillness. He saw how I was unconsciously touching my lips, a common self-soothing gesture, but also a sign someone might check for facial numbness. He saw the slight tremor in my hand when I reached for my napkin, a tremor I hadn't even registered myself. To everyone else, I was a quiet older woman. To a man trained to spot the early signs of a stroke or a neurological event, I was a flashing yellow light. He stood by Leo's side, his presence professional and unobtrusive. He uncorked the wine with a practiced, elegant motion, the small pop barely audible over the restaurant's hum. He was explaining the wine's notes of blackberry and oak to my son, his face a mask of polite engagement, but his eyes, I now know, were taking in the entire landscape of our table. He was watching the power dynamics, the way Amber spoke for me, the way Leo deferred to her. And because he was watching, he saw the move. It was so fast, so seamless, anyone else would have missed it. While all eyes were on the ruby red wine he was pouring into Leo's glass for the ceremonial tasting, Amber reached into her small, impossibly expensive handbag. She pulled out a chic silver pill case, the kind a woman might use for an aspirin. It looked like a designer accessory. With a single practiced movement of her thumb, she clicked it open. Rick told me his paramedic instinct screamed at that moment. People who need legitimate medication nitroglycerin for a heart condition, for example, don't hide it. They don't wait until everyone is distracted. He kept his monologue about the wine going, his voice never faltering, but his gaze was locked on her hands. He saw the tiny white pill drop into her palm. He saw her other hand come over the top, the subtle grinding motion of her thumb crushing it into a fine powder. It was the move of someone who had done this many, many times. And then, the final, damning act. With her left hand, she gestured toward the wine, drawing Leo's attention. "It looks wonderful, doesn't it, honey?" she said. And with her right, she picked up my glass of water. Under the guise of adjusting its position on the table, she let the powder fall from her cupped hand into the water. It dissolved instantly, invisibly. She then took the mint sprig and casually, gracefully stirred it. 1, 2, 3 times. The perfect crime, committed in plain sight. Rick didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He didn't drop the bottle. He simply finished pouring the taste of wine for Leo, his hands as steady as a surgeon's, but in his mind, the equation was complete. The data points clicked into place with horrifying certainty. Patient with subtle neurological symptoms, plus a caregiver exhibiting controlling behavior, plus the surreptitious administration of an unknown substance, equals a probable, intentional poisoning in progress. The textbook definition of a scene he was trained to intervene in. Leo swirled the wine in his glass, sniffed it like he'd seen people do in movies, and nodded his approval. "It's great," he said. "We'll take it." Rick nodded back, his expression perfectly neutral. He began to move around the table to pour for the other guests. He made his way to Amber, then to Leo's boss. My heart sank with every step he took away from me. He was moving past my side of the table, his duty to the wine service overriding whatever he may or may not have seen. He walked away from our table, placing the bottle on a nearby service stand, and a cold wave of utter despair washed over me. He had seen it. I knew in my gut that he had, and he was doing nothing. He was just a wine steward after all. Why would he get involved? My last tiny, irrational flicker of hope was gone, leaving me alone in the dark. Alone in the dark. I looked at the glass, then at my son, who was now engaged in a deep conversation with his boss, and then back at the glass. My hand, feeling heavy and disconnected from my own body, began to lift from my lap. I was a cornered animal, and this was the only path I could see. And then, chaos erupted at the edge of the table. Rick, the sommelier, had returned, holding a heavy glass pitcher of what I assumed was regular water. "My apologies for the delay," he began, and then his foot seemed to catch on the leg of a chair. It was a stumble so realistic, so perfectly executed, it was a work of art. He pitched forward, and in a symphony of destruction the pitcher left his hands, colliding with my small water glass. There was a sharp crack, a crash, and then a tidal wave of ice and water flooded our section of the table. There were gasps. Amber shrieked as water soaked the sleeve of her white pantsuit. Silverware clattered onto the floor. For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to stop and stare. Rick was the picture of mortification. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry." "Ma'am, are you all right? I am terribly clumsy, please forgive me." Staff materialized from everywhere, dabbing at the spreading dark stain on the white linen tablecloth, picking up ice cubes from the floor. In the flurry of activity, Rick was beside me, blotting at the sleeve of my dress with a fresh napkin. He was leaning in close, his face a mask of professional horror. "1,000 apologies," he said loudly for the benefit of the table. And then, his voice dropped to a whisper so low it was barely a breath against my ear, a secret meant only for me in the heart of the storm. "Ma'am, do not let her order you another. Go to the restroom. Now." He pulled back, still apologizing profusely to Leo, who was waving it off, saying, "Accidents happen, but I wasn't listening to them." His words were echoing in my mind, a flashing red light in the fog of my fear. Do not let her order you another. He had seen it. He had seen it, and he had created this beautiful, chaotic, perfect diversion. He had given me a way out. My body moved before my mind had fully caught up. "Oh my," I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I'm quite soaked. I'd better go and freshen up." "I'll come with you," Amber started to say, already rising. No, Rick interjected smoothly, blocking her path slightly. "Allow us to take care of this. We'll have the table completely reset by the time you return, ma'am." I didn't wait for another offer. I stood up and walked away, my legs feeling steadier than they had all night. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I walked through the restaurant past the curious faces and pushed open the heavy door to the ladies' room. The silence inside was a shock after the noise. It was sterile and white, smelling faintly of jasmine soap, the low hum of the ventilation the only sound. I walked to the marble counter and gripped its cold, hard edge, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a truth that was now undeniable. My mind, which had felt so foggy with fear, suddenly snapped into focus. It became a blackboard, a ledger. All the variables, all the data points I had been collecting for weeks, began to arrange themselves into a final, terrifying proof. Given a new substance, the supplements, is introduced into my system. Anomalous physical symptoms, the data in my ledger, begin immediately after. My logical concerns are dismissed by my son, using my daughter-in-law's exact, unscientific language. My daughter-in-law attempts to surreptitiously administer another unknown substance in a public setting. An independent expert observer, a former paramedic, recognizes the danger and creates a desperate, risky intervention. My mind flashed back to that night with Leo and the geometry proof. Sometimes you just have to find the right angle. The problem wasn't my health. The problem wasn't my nerves. The problem was Amber. Q-E-D. A wave of cold, clarifying anger washed through me, chasing away the last remnants of fear and doubt. She had tried to use my mind against me, to make me believe I was losing it. But my mind was the one thing she couldn't poison. My mind was my weapon. And what do you do when a mathematical proof is complete? You state the conclusion. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened a new text message. I didn't call Leo. I didn't call a friend. I contacted the only people who would deal in facts, not feelings. I typed in the numbers 911. Then I wrote the calmest, most logical message of my life. My name is Helen Vance. I am at Aperture Restaurant in Scottsdale. I believe my daughter-in-law, Amber Vance, who is at my table, has just attempted to poison me. She may be carrying the substance in a silver pill case in her handbag. I read it over once, checking for errors. It was clear. It was precise. It contained all the necessary data. I pressed send. I took a deep breath, tucked my phone back into my purse, and looked at my reflection one last time. The woman looking back at me was not a victim. She was not a confused old woman. She was a mathematician who had just solved the most important equation of her life. I smoothed my dress, pushed the door open, and walked back out into the restaurant. I was no longer a pawn in Amber's game. I had just turned the board around, and I was walking back to my seat to watch her play her final, losing move. Walking back to that table was like returning to the scene of a crime, only this time I wasn't the victim. I was the chief witness for the prosecution. The staff, with remarkable efficiency, had already replaced the soiled tablecloth. A fresh glass of regular water sat at my place. It was as if the whole chaotic episode had never happened. Amber was mid-sentence, regaling Leo's boss with a story about a wellness retreat in Sedona. She was trying to weave her web again, to re-establish the calm, controlled atmosphere she thrived in, but she kept glancing toward the restaurant entrance, a tiny crack in her composure. My little trip to the restroom had introduced an unknown variable, and it was making her uneasy. I sat down, and the conversation faltered. All eyes were on me. I offered them a small, serene smile. "Much better," I said simply. Leo looked relieved, ready to move on. "Great. Well, as I was saying, the cantilever design is..." But he never got to finish his sentence, because at that moment 2 people approached our table. They didn't have the deferential posture of the waitstaff. A man and a woman, both in smart business casual, moved with a quiet, purposeful energy that instantly silenced our table. The woman, who had kind eyes but a firm mouth, addressed Amber directly. "Amber Vance?" Amber's smile tightened, becoming a brittle porcelain thing. "Yes? Can I help you? We're in the middle of a celebration here." "I'm Detective Harding. This is Detective Morales," the woman said, gesturing to her partner. She held up a badge in a small leather holder, a quick, discreet motion. "We need you to come with us. We have a few questions." A ripple of shock went around the table. Leo's boss looked utterly bewildered. Leo himself shot to his feet. "Questions? What is this about? There must be some mistake. My wife hasn't done anything." Amber laughed, a sharp, theatrical sound. "Is this a joke? Leo, did one of your friends from college put you up to this? It's not funny." She looked at the detectives, her expression one of amused condescension. "I think you have the wrong person. We have a credible report that you are in possession of a controlled toxic substance," Detective Morales, the man said. His voice was low and flat, leaving no room for argument. "A what?" Leo said, his voice rising in disbelief. "That's insane. Who would make a report like that?" Every single person at the table, including the detectives, turned to look at me. The spotlight was now mine. This was the moment. I could see the calculation in Amber's eyes, the gears turning as she prepared to paint me as a senile, vindictive old woman having a psychotic break. I saw the utter confusion on my son's face, his world tilting on its axis. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I looked past Amber, past my son, and directly at the kind, firm eyes of Detective Harding. I thought of my ledger, of the columns of irrefutable data. I gave them my conclusion. "Please check her purse," I said, my voice as calm and steady as if I were explaining a geometric theorem. "She carries a small silver pill case. The pills inside are likely aconite, also known as monkshood." The effect of those words was more powerful than any scream. The name of the poison, so specific and confident, hung in the air. It wasn't a vague, hysterical accusation. It was a piece of actionable intelligence. Amber's condescending smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure, animal panic. "This is harassment," she snapped, clutching her expensive handbag to her chest. "My mother-in-law has been unwell. She gets confused. She's been having paranoid episodes." "Is that right?" Detective Harding said, her gaze never leaving Amber. "Then you won't mind if we take a look in your bag, will you? Just to clear this all up. I will not be searched in the middle of a restaurant." Amber's voice was rising, losing its smooth, polished edge and becoming shrill. "You'll need a warrant for that." "We can get one," Detective Morales said calmly. "Or you can come with us now and we can sort this out down at the station. Your choice, but we are sorting it out." Leo was frozen, looking back and forth between his wife, now backed into a corner, and his mother, who sat there with an unnerving, quiet calm. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The foundation of his world was crumbling, and he didn't know which side to stand on. Amber saw she had lost. She saw the implacable resolve in the detectives' faces. With a trembling hand, she placed her purse on the table. The silence was absolute. Every diner within earshot had stopped eating, their forks hovering in midair. Detective Harding unzipped the handbag with a gloved hand. She moved aside a wallet, a phone, a tube of lipstick, and then she pulled it out. A small, chic, silver pill case. She placed it on the table. It seemed to catch every light in the room. She clicked it open. Inside were a half-dozen small, chalky white pills. Amber didn't say a word. She just stared at the open case on the table, her entire carefully constructed world reduced to a handful of poison. "Mrs. Vance," Detective Harding said, her voice now devoid of any kindness, "you need to come with us, now." As they escorted her away, her arms held firmly by her sides, she turned her head and looked at me. The mask of the loving daughter-in-law, the concerned wife, the wellness guru, it was all gone. All that was left was a look of pure, reptilian hatred, a promise of a reckoning that would never come. I watched her go, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet, cold finality of a solved equation. Leo remained standing, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, his face a canvas of shattered disbelief. He was left alone in the wreckage, the architect of a beautiful life who had just discovered its foundations were rotten to the core. The drive home from the restaurant was silent. There was nothing to say. The wreckage was too vast, the silence between me and my son too loud. He dropped me at my door, the words, "I'm sorry, Mom," a choked whisper in the dark, and then he was gone. For 2 days, I heard nothing. The police called. A victim's advocate called. My house was quiet, orderly, and felt like a fortress. Then, on the 3rd day, my doorbell rang. It was Leo, looking like an architect who had just watched his own masterpiece collapse into dust. He stood on my doorstep, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He looked older, not by days, but by a decade. I stepped aside and let him in without a word. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where he'd done his homework as a boy. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For a long time, he just stared at his hands, resting on the smooth oak tabletop. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking on the single word. I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry. It's not enough. I know it's not. But I am so sorry. I should have listened. I should have believed you." He was looking for absolution, for a comforting word that would tell him it was all okay. I knew that's what he needed. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a balm you apply to a wound. It's the painful, meticulous work of setting the bone so it can heal straight. Easy comfort now would just ensure we were broken forever. I didn't answer his apology. Instead, I stood up, walked to my desk in the sunroom, and picked up the small accounting ledger. I walked back to the table and placed it between us. Its simple, unassuming cover was a stark contrast to the emotional chaos in the room. I opened it to the first page, where the columns were neatly drawn, and pushed it toward him. "Before you apologize," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "you need to understand exactly what you're apologizing for." He looked down at the book, his brow furrowed in confusion. He started to read. I watched his face as he took it all in. I saw his eyes scan the first entry. October 3rd, 10:15 a.m. Tingling divided by numbness in fingertips, left hand. I saw a flicker of recognition, the memory of our phone call. I watched him turn the page, and then the next, his breathing growing heavier. He was no longer just reading words. He was experiencing the last few months of my life in a terrifying, compressed timeline. He was seeing the data he had dismissed. The dizziness, the heart palpitations, the metallic taste. All the anomalies I had presented to him as a logical concern, which he, under Amber's influence, had diagnosed as the ramblings of a nervous old woman. The evidence was no longer just my word against his wife's. It was here, in black and white, a meticulous, undeniable record of a slow, methodical poisoning. I had a pot of tea steeping on the counter, and I got up to pour us 2 cups, my movements calm and deliberate. The familiar ritual was an anchor in the storm. I placed a cup in front of him. He didn't seem to notice. He was nearing the end of the entries, his hand trembling as he turned the final page. And then I saw his body go still. He had reached the last entry I had made before the night at the restaurant. His eyes were fixed on the 7 words I had written. "Spoke to Leo. He is not a reliable source of data." He read it once, then twice. He slowly lifted his head, and for the first time since he had arrived, he looked me directly in the eye. The hollow confusion was gone, replaced by a look of profound, soul-crushing understanding. The shame was so raw, so deep, I almost looked away. He finally closed the book, his hand resting on the cover as if it were a holy text. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. "You tried to show me the data," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "My whole life, you taught me to trust the data, to check the proof, and I wouldn't look at it. I listened to the sales pitch instead of the mathematician." There it was. He wasn't just apologizing for trusting Amber. He was apologizing for betraying the very foundation of who I was and who he was. He understood the real nature of his mistake. Tears were now streaming freely down his face, silent and unashamed. "She was talking about getting power of attorney," he choked out. "About looking at facilities for your own good." And I was starting to think, "Oh God, Mom." I was starting to believe her. I reached across the table and finally, I took his hand. It was cold as ice. "She is a master of manipulation, Leo," I said softly. "She manipulated me too. She played on my desire to keep the peace. She played on your fear and your guilt." "But I should have known," he insisted, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I should have protected you." "Yes, you should have," I said, and the truth of it, stark and unvarnished, hung between us. "But you can't fix what's broken by wishing it were different. You can only fix it by building something new." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Can we fix this?" "An architect knows you can't rebuild on a rotten foundation, Leo," I said, squeezing his hand. "We have to tear it all down. All the assumptions, all the things left unsaid, and we have to start over, with the truth, with the data." He nodded, a small, jerky motion. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a happy ending. It was the beginning of a long, difficult construction project. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. We had the blueprint. We just had to do the work. And so we did the work. Brick by painful, honest brick, Leo and I started to build a new foundation. There were difficult conversations, sessions with a family therapist, and long silences that were more about healing than about anger. But I realized that the blueprint we were using, the one based on brutal honesty and verifiable facts, wasn't just for us. It was a plan that could help others, a way to give them the tools I had been forced to forge for myself in the dark. That's how, 6 months later, I found myself standing not in my quiet kitchen, but on a small, brightly lit stage in the auditorium of the Scottsdale Community Center. The air smelled of stale coffee and lemon pledge. Before me were about 50 people, men and women mostly my age or older, their faces etched with the kind of experiences and quiet worries that life writes on you. They were here for the inaugural meeting of a program I had created in partnership with a local legal aid nonprofit. Behind me, projected on a large screen, was a single, stark slide. It was a screenshot of a headline from the Arizona Republic Digital Edition. Wellness guru Amber Vance sentenced to life in prison for murder. Attempted murder. Police link her to string of elder poisonings. I didn't dwell on it. It wasn't the focus of my story. It was just the final, grim entry in a ledger that was now closed. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and steady in the microphone. "My name is Helen Vance, and for a very long time, I was a math teacher. I believe in the power of data. I believe that the truth, like a mathematical proof, is something that can be demonstrated with clear, sequential, and undeniable evidence." I looked out at the faces. Some were curious, some were skeptical, some were hopeful. I saw myself in them, the pride, the fierce desire for independence, and the quiet, nagging fear of losing it. "Our society has a narrative about aging," I continued. "It's a story of decline. They see our gray hair and our wrinkles, and they see fragility. They use words like confused and anxious and frail. They speak to us in condescending tones, as if our minds have softened along with our bodies. They see us as problems to be managed, but they are reading the data all wrong." I paused, letting the words sink in. "We are not liabilities, we are assets. We are the most experienced, resilient, and battle-tested generation alive. Our minds are not databases of fading memories. They are archives of wisdom, of problems solved and crises overcome. The issue isn't our decline. The issue is that we have stopped keeping our own records." From the lectern, I picked up a handsome, spiral-bound notebook. Its cover was a simple, elegant blue, and in clean, bold letters it said, "The Elder Ledger, a personal record of your well-being." "This," I said, holding it up, "is a tool of empowerment. It's based on a simple accounting ledger I kept for myself when I started to believe that my own reality was being rewritten by someone else. This isn't a diary for your feelings. This is a logbook for the facts of your life." I saw Leo in the back of the room, standing by a table laden with copies of the ledger and informational pamphlets. He wasn't there as the award-winning architect. He was just a volunteer, my son, his presence a quiet testament to the work we had done. He caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging nod. The foundation was holding. "Inside," I explained, flipping through the pages, "you'll find simple, clear columns. A section for your health, where you can document every new medication, every doctor's visit, and any unusual symptoms. Note the date, the time, the specifics. A section for your finances, to log any significant discussions, any requests for access to your accounts, any documents you are asked to sign. Note who was present and what was said. And a section for your daily life, to note visits, conversations, and interactions that feel anomalous." I looked back up at the crowd. When someone tries to tell you that you're confused, that you're forgetting things, that your reality isn't real, your feelings are not a defense, they will call it paranoia. But they cannot argue with a written, dated, and consistent record. They cannot argue with data. This ledger turns you from a passive recipient of care into the chief data scientist of your own life. It gives you proof. It ensures that your story is told by the only person qualified to tell it, you. A man in the front row, who had been listening with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, slowly unfolded them. A woman next to him began to nod. "The person who tried to harm me saw me as a problem to be erased, but she made a critical error. She underestimated the mind of a mathematician. She forgot that we are all, in our own way, experts and scientists of our own lives. We have a lifetime of data to draw upon. We just need to trust it." As I finished, a wave of applause, warm and genuine, filled the room. It wasn't for a performance, it was a sound of recognition, of shared strength. I looked at Leo, and he was applauding too, his face full of a quiet, hard-won pride. The ledger that had begun as a symbol of my isolation, a secret record kept in the dark, was now here, in the light, a symbol of connection, a tool for a community. The equation had been solved, and the solution was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined.